welcome to Books for Beneficiaries. My name is Pete Williams, the host of the program on which we talk about the needs of beneficiaries. In estate planning matters, it is the estate owner that takes center stage, and that, of course, is appropriate. It is, after all, their wealth. However, the beneficiary sometimes is left in the dark as to the process. They have needs and questions. They want to ensure that they have their proper inheritance. So I am hopeful that this series will shed some light and give them some information that will help them. I call this series Books for Beneficiaries. So stay tuned for the next chapter and check back for more to come. Last time we spoke about trust, and in fact, we honed in on the Revocable Living Trust, which is a very common estate planning tool. And we talked about the fact that trusts are a three-party entity where you have a settlor, trustee, and a beneficiary. And sure enough, a Revocable Living Trust is that. And in fact, when the trust is written, typically the settlor, the creator of the trust, is all three. There's some common misconceptions about the Revocable Living Trust. Let me go through these really quickly. First is that there is some sort of tax saving with the Revocable Living Trust. Second is protection of creditors. Third is that it's only for the wealthy. And fourth, you kind of set it and forget it. And once you get it done, you don't have to do anything else with it again. So let's talk about the tax ramifications. It is a pass-through entity. So all taxable income comes through to the creator of the trust. The Social Security number of the creator is used for tax reporting purposes. So there's really no tax advantages. Ordinary income is ordinary income. Capital gains are capital gains to the creator in a Revocable Living Trust. The same ramifications apply to a settlor, whether they own assets outright or whether they own them in a Revocable Living Trust. Now, there are certain advantages at death that we will get, and we'll get into more of this later on. Revocable Living Trust can be advantageous with regard to estate taxes. Basically, it is terms of the trust that say, hey, if I am subject to estate taxes, make sure that I use my maximum credits in this trust. But all of this is not until death. During life, there are minimal to no tax advantages. So the other misconception about a Revocable Living Trust, and I've actually had this in my own practice, and that is where people think that somehow it has some sort of creditor protection. While the creator is alive, because it's a pass-through entity, all assets in that trust belong to the creator. And because the creator can get their hands on it and spend it, that means that a creditor can attach those assets. So that means that in a lawsuit, if there's a judgment against the creator of a trust, they can attach Revocable Living Trust properties. Now, we're going to talk about other types of trusts later on that are non-revocable, irrevocable trusts where they can attach because they do not belong to the creator. The third misconception is it's only for the wealthy. So for one thing, there's the flexibility of the Revocable Living Trust. The Revocable Living Trust handles assets, live, die, or become incapacitated. And that's important for everybody. The wealthy and the non-wealthy, even somebody with a modest estate, an average estate, would gain great advantage with the flexibility of a Revocable Living Trust. Because number one, it plans for contingencies. So we all think that, grandma and grandpa die first, and then the parents die, then the kids, and then the grandkids. It doesn't always happen that way. So when you create a trust and you plan for the norm, husband dies first, wife second, and then it goes to the kids, and then when the kids die, it goes to the grandkids. Life doesn't always deal that deck. Sometimes unexpected things happen, such as a premature death of a child, grandchild. People don't always die in order that you might think. And the trust can plan for that. In the trust document, you say, I leave my assets to my child, but if my child dies before me, leave it to his children. The Revocable Living Trust also plans for incapacity. So who controls an asset when the creator is unable to do so by reason of incapacity? We're generally talking about mental incapacity here, but it could be physical incapacity as well if someone doesn't have the ability to sign documents and make decisions. So you need somebody else to step in, and the revocable living trust automatically does that. So it's very similar to a power of attorney. Now compare that to joint tenancy accounts or beneficiary accounts. So let's just say you have a pay on death account at the bank. You might think you're good. When you die, that asset, that bank account will go to your named beneficiary. And that's all well and good as if you're okay and then you die. But what happens if you have a period of incapacity? Who handles that bank account? The trust takes care of that through the trust terms. So if the asset is in trust, if the bank account is in trust, then the successor trustee takes over and handles that bank account. So there's a lot of flexibility, even for smaller estates. You have that continuity, you have that check writing ability when you have assets in a revocable trust. And that is needed in large as well as small estates. Because of probate costs in many states, it is important for the smaller estate to have a revocable living trust. I'm in the state of California. Probate costs here are a percentage of gross value of the estate. And there's two fees. There's an attorney fee and an executor fee when you go through probate. So that's up to 8%. Now, that's up to $100,000 of estate, but that's 8% of the gross value. So you've got to be very careful when you have a smaller estate. Probate fees can really dig into the net value after expenses. So if you have a revocable living trust, you avoid those probate costs. The other advantage to a revocable living trust to smaller estates is the handling of minor children and any beneficiary with some sort of incapacity. For instance, if a beneficiary that has a special need, a trust can be devised so that upon death, the assets go into a special needs trust so that special needs child does not lose government benefits. Because remember, government benefits are based on the wealth of the person. So if the person has a lot of wealth, they don't get government benefits, Medicaid and supplemental benefits and that sort of thing. So the revocable living trust can be designed for that. And that's very important, even with smaller states, to set up a trust with language for special needs children and also minor children. What to do when the creator of the trust dies. The trust can be written such that assets are held in trust until a certain age. Compare that to somebody who does not have a trust and just has a will, and they leave money to a 12-year-old. Then there will be a need to go into court to create conservatorships, guardianships. Those terms mean different things in different states, but you have to set up a fund for the child until they turn a certain age. And the trust can do that by its terms and without the need to go into a guardianship. Another misconception is that, hey, I go through all this trouble with my attorney, I get a revocable living trust, thank gosh, you say it's done. And you know what? It may or may not be done. The first thing that has to happen after you get a revocable living trust is you have to move assets into the trust. The trust only controls assets within that trust. And that's important for you beneficiaries out there to know that the terms of that trust only control assets in the trust. So the creator of that trust should have put assets in trust. And sometimes what happens is that somebody might buy some property or move bank accounts and forget to put it in the name of the trust. Out of convenience, they just may want to put it in their own name outside of the trust. And that can be a problem because the trust does not control it unless it's in the name of the trust. The other reason that set and forget is not appropriate is that there's continual family changes. People die, people get married, there's new children, grandchildren. I will say this, that normally in a revocable living trust, if it's well written, it plans for many contingencies, but that doesn't mean you forget about that. So you want to be mindful of these things. It doesn't mean that there has to be changes in the trust, but you certainly want to make sure your assets are in the name of the trust, future asset purchases are in the name of the trust, and also that you keep up with family structure and to see if the trust is written in such a way that your assets are handled in the way you want them, given that family structure. I'm just going to finish up here again with some sample language. Certainly in a revocable living trust, there's going to be a paragraph about the ability to revoke or amend the trust. And there's going to be typically a clause that says that the settlor is the beneficiary. That's what makes it a revocable living trust. That's what makes it a pass-through entity. It's always nice when there is a clause that talks about current family. And it's always nice to know if the beneficiaries are adults or minors. So when I pick up a document and I want to find out beneficiaries, I want to know if there's any minor beneficiaries there, because that's important to find out what the trust says about minors who are unable to open up a bank account. Many times the trust actually gives birth dates, and there's usually a clause that defines issue. And so issue means that it's the children and the issue thereof. So it typically is not spouses. There is also generally a section in a living trust that talks about incapacity. What I've worded here is that if, as certified in writing by the settlor's attending physician, settlor has become incapacitated, the trustee will continue to pay to the settlor or for the settlor's benefit. So let's break that down. If, as certified by the settlor's attending physician, in other words, how do we know somebody's incapacitated? Well, the successor trustee better have something in writing by a doctor that says, hey, this person can't handle their affairs anymore. Sometimes this clause talks about two attending physicians. Certainly, if you have two physicians that declare the person incapacitated, that's pretty good evidence that the successor trustee can take over and start paying to the settlor or settlor's benefit. And that's the other point, is that just because somebody becomes incapacitated doesn't mean the trust is now for somebody else. So you beneficiaries out there ought to know that when somebody becomes incapacitated, those assets in that trust are for the settlor's benefit. So I'm going to end right here and take up next time as to what happens when somebody dies. And this is really going to be key to the beneficiaries out there, because now when the settlor dies, that's when assets are paid over to the beneficiary. And the beneficiary wants to know the terms of the trust and wants to understand the terms of the trust so they know what their rights are. So in any event, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. As I say, this is just for general advice. It is not specific legal, tax, or investment advice for you. You should go and seek out your own advisor with regard to those areas. I do hope these episodes will help you find the right person and give you an understanding so that you can ask intelligent questions. So that's it for now. Stay tuned for wrapping up with Revocable Living Trusts in my next episode, or maybe two, coming up. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.